anyway, without further ado, everybody is chiming in as people continue to start. We welcome to Grand Round, September 2023. And it's with great pleasure I have to introduce to you family and friends and the like, Dr. Douglas Graham. Dr. Graham's a lifetime athlete and raw fooder since 1978. As an advisor to world-class and motivated athletes and trainers from around the globe, he's worked professionally with top performers from almost every sport, and every field of entertainment, including such notables as legend Martina Navratilova, NBA pro basketball players Ronnie Grandison, Michael Porter Jr., track Olympic sprinter Doug Dickinson, pro women's soccer player Callie Withers, championship bodybuilder Kenneth G. And Chicken of the Soul co-author Mark Victor Hansen and actress Demi Moore. A lot of names I know. Dr. Graham is the author of many books on the health and raw food, including the 80-10-10 diet, the high energy diet recipe guide, nutrition and athletic performance, brain damage, prevention and care of athletic injuries, and his latest is Perpetual Health 365. He has shared his strategies for success with audiences at more than 4,000 presentations worldwide. Recognized as one of the fathers of the modern raw food movement, he will inspire, motivate, educate, and entertain you like no one else in the health movement can. Doug, welcome to the community, and thank you very much for coming and sharing your wisdom.
Thanks so much. Thank you so very much. I appreciate being here. It's fun to see the other professionals getting involved in promoting raw foods and the powers of it. It's interesting. Somebody was asking me about longevity just recently. They said, what can I eat? I want to live longer. I said, well, there's no foods that make you live longer. There's only foods that make you live shorter.
That's a great quote. That's a great quote. You're only going to take away from the years you have.
Yeah, that's it. So,
yeah, I was introduced to this by a local person who, at the time, he's name's John Rose. I don't know if you heard the name. He does a lot of
John Rose. Sure, I know John Rose. Of course,
he's coaching and all, and he's
very enthusiastic.
Very enthusiastic, exactly. And so my introduction to all of this was through John Rose. He coached me through a 33-day raw juice feast, and I felt amazing. And he was a big proponent of raw foods. And, it was interesting. I did the 32 days of raw juice feasting. And then after that, I did raw for, a few months. And then I started adding a little cooked and things got out of hand. But as I got back toward raw foods and eating more, I realized the difference. I mean, it's like night and day. And it's very powerful. And I know you have a specific topic you're going to get at, but one of the underlying questions that I get, and I think this audience is going to have, and I'll just sort of throw it out there. You don't have to directly answer it now, but what are some of the secrets of staying on that raw or high raw diet over time? What are some of the tricks? And the people are coming off of a lot of cooked foods, but dead animal flesh and the like. So that's an underlying question that I get a lot, and I'm sure it's in the minds of many people in this audience today. So I'm just going to lay that out there, and then over time, you can help us address that. But take away the stage.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, I want to say it's a treat to be here. I haven't been in Texas in a while, but I used to stop in Texas all the time. Well, you couldn't drive across country without spending a day in Texas. So I never did figure out how to get from one end to the other in the same day.
Yeah, tell me about it. The state's as big as Texas, I guess.
It's amazing. So I started out just like everybody else. I mean, I ate pretty much a standard American diet. We ate reasonably well. My dad grew up on a farm. My mom grew up in the city. And so we had a garden. I lived in New Jersey, the Garden State. During the summertime, you could always stop at a farmer's market and get food. But I mean, health food never occurred to me, certainly. And I ate my weight in meat every year, and I ate my weight in dairy probably every month. And I had all the childhood problems that everybody else had. I was so sick as a 4-year-old that they weren't going to let me out of kindergarten because I didn't attend enough days. I was just a sick kid, and I was very athletic. It never occurred to me that anything was wrong. I just always had a runny nose. I was always stuffed up. It's just how it was. And by the time I was 5 and they took out my tonsils, and then I started really getting sick, and I remember having mumps. I remember having 105 plus temperature,
Wow.
which by then the walls start shimmering and things really got interesting up much over 105.
Wow.
Yeah, that was exceptional. But everything you could get, I got. I got chicken pox when I was 2, and I remember having whooping cough at around 7, and I mean, I just measles and mumps and everything you could get. I felt like like out of a poem or something. So Christopher Robbins, was that him? He had the measles and the sneezels and the mumps and everything else.
I think so.
So I was sick, but I was healthy, and I was reasonably. I mean, I could keep up with my mates, on anything, and school was never a challenge. School was always kind of boring because it just, they teach to the average person, and I could do that. And I was a voracious reader, and my mom was heavy. So she was always going on a diet, and back then, at least, if she went on a diet, we all went on it. There was just no way around it. And I remember one time asking my mom, how does she know how much food to make? And she said, well, I know how much to make for me, and I know how much to make for your sister because she eats just like me. And then I make that much again for your dad. And then I make that much again for you. So as an athlete, I could eat, and as a growing boy, I could really eat, but my skin could break out, and there was times I couldn't breathe, and I got allergy shots every week for 6 years. And I mean, it was just really, when I look back on it, I count myself very, very fortunate I survived. Be honest, I count myself fortunate I survived. My mom switched to Weight Watchers, and which meant that every dinner started with either fruit or a salad. That was your choices. You start with fruit or salad. So that got kind of ingrained into me by the time I was in middle school and high school. We always started dinner with either fruit or a salad, and that seemed to make sense. I didn't argue that. I like fruit as much as the next guy, but I'd rather be eating 2 pizzas, rather be eating barbecue off the grill. The taste was just divine. And there's no arguing, the taste was divine. But as an athlete, I was in gymnastics, and having a couple of extra pounds was terrible as a gymnast, even just a couple of pounds. So I got interested in health. I remember all my teachers' names from 3rd grade to 8th grade that taught health, and then high school. And they all said one thing. They said, fruits and vegetables are good for you. They said a bunch of other stuff, but everybody said fruits and vegetables are good for you. I was a health and phys ed major in college, took every nutrition course offered all the way through my medical training, 4 years of chiropractic training. I took chemistry or nutrition, whichever they cared to call it at the time, every single semester and every course they offered. And nutrition just fascinated me. And finally, it just, well, I'll backtrack for a second, but I'll get right into the topic. I was 16 years old. I went to the beach. I only lived a mile from the beach. I love going to the beach, but it was April. So I'm out on the beach in April and just looking at the ocean because it's too cold to go in. And I had an experience, and I've talked about it before, but I had an experience because I didn't hear a sound, but inside my head, I heard a sound, and I heard one word, and the word was health, and it came from kind of like out of the sky. This was this is a weird experience that I didn't tell very many people about. And it was so, I mean, I turned my back on it and started walking up the beach back to my house. And I turned away from the ocean and I started walking up the beach, and it came at me again from the other side, but again out of the sky. Health. Just that one word. And I go, oh. I dedicated my life to health right then and there. Because I realized I didn't have an option. Now, I will admit, in college, I did get a little distracted. But that was the 70s, you get a little distracted. But health was the thing, and I just stayed with that. And I asked my mom one day, she's still working Weight Watchers 25 years, and I asked her one day, I said, if all your clients, all those super heavy people, if they just came and lived with me and they just did what I do all day, be super active and eat fruits and vegetables, eat just good food, don't you think they'd all just lose the weight and get healthy? And she said, yeah, they probably would. So my eyes started opening, and I attended a lecture in 1980 from this guy who put a whole bunch of weird facts together as a coach for gymnasts. And the fact that he put these weird, seemingly unconnected facts together, like every quarterback in the NFL at the time had blue eyes, and weird little bits and pieces, right? No, top 300 gymnasts in the world, none of them are firstborn children. Like, oh, like there must be so, if a kid comes to you and says, I want to be a world-class gymnast, like, aren't you going to ask them if they're firstborn? Because the odds are against them. Moms really protect the firstborn. Anyway, it fascinated me enough that I said, you know what? I need to be able to grasp a lot of seemingly unconnected information and put it together and see what I come up with. And sometimes you come up with nothing. But sometimes you come up with something like this. All the long-lived people in the world seemingly have nothing in common. They each have their own little thing, except they all eat a relatively low-fat diet compared to the rest of the world. All of them. Yes, they live in mountains, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff, and then we look at the fastest runners in the world, and the Kenyans running team, they all eat, they're not vegan, they're not raw, but they eat a relatively low-fat diet, almost all carbohydrates. And then we look and you go, how do the animals eat that are built like us? All the anthropoid primates, the monkeys that don't have tails. And it turns out that all of them eat a low-fat diet. All of them. Now, there's a rule in law, in science, that's called comparative anatomy, that says that any animal that's anatomically and physiologically similar to another animal will thrive on similar food. So you can look at all the animals with hoofs and 4 legs, and they're all grazers, and they might not eat exactly the same grasses. They might not choose cows will choose different food than horses, but you can put them out in the same field and they'll all graze. The ones with fangs and sharp claws and eyes are set different, and they have multiple teats, and they all hunt their prey. And the ones that have builds that are pretty much similar to us, I mean, the bonobo shares 99.8% of our genetic material. I think I've been passed by people driving cars on the highway who shared less genetic material than that with me. I'm pretty sure. And I've seen videos of orangutans driving cars, so I know it can be done. Anyway, They share all our genetic material. And this interesting thing happened. When you list all of the anthropoid primates, you can list them in different ways. You can list them according to how much genetic material they share with us. And you come up with a specific order. By the way, the gorilla is the furthest on that list. That's only about 98%. But they're all up in the 98s to 99%. And then if you list them according to intelligence, you come up with a specific order, and it turns out it's identical to the order of genetic material shared with us. And then if you list them according to the amount of fruit in their diet, you come up with an order, and that order is identical to genetic material and intelligence. The only exception would be putting us out of that category. All the other categories line up perfectly, including us. And any IQ test that says, what's wrong with this picture, would say, people need to be at the top of that heap of eating more fruit than any of the others because we're at the top of all the other lines, and we should be at the top of that line as well. It should just line up. The overwhelming majority of everything I learned in school taught me that fruits and vegetables are good for us. In fact, that fruits and vegetables are better for us than anything else we could possibly eat. They're always listed as health foods around the world. And there's a reason you get better on juices. It's not because of the juices. It's because you stop eating everything else. You can't make cheeseburger juice. Nobody sells that. They don't sell toast juice. They just don't juice pizza. You stop eating the things that make you sick, you get well. And every farmer has relied on that since the beginning of time. Every animal that's ever been raised for 4-H club prize hog. How do you grow a prize hog? Well, you give it everything it needs. You nurture it. We rely on this when we raise our kids. We nurture them into healthy living. We nurture them into positive. Oh, Dad, can I smoke and drink like you? No, it'll stunt your growth and development. We nurture our kids. We give them everything they need. And I asked a farmer recently who grows, I read an article, he grows the best tomatoes in all of England. And I happen to live a mile from him. So I asked him, I said, how come you grow such great tomatoes? He goes, I give my tomatoes everything they need. I met this farmer out in Seattle, Washington, and he's been growing organic melons on the same property for 52 years. I said, Art, how come your melons are the best I've ever tasted? He said, I give my melons everything they need. And I heard those two things within a month of each other from those, and I'm going, wow, you mean all we really have to do? If there's a contest and everybody in the room gets a sunflower seed, who's going to grow the best sunflower? Everybody gets African violet seeds. We know how to raise the best African violets. Just give them everything they need. Don't give them anything they don't need. Give them everything they do need. You win the prize. This is how we grow. And it turns out that, at least on this planet, health is the default condition. It's the natural state. It's what's supposed to happen as long as we get everything we need. And it led me down a bunch of rabbit holes. I lived in the Florida Keys for a long time, where people have heard me say before, like, there's more culture in yogurt than there is in the Florida Keys. There was nothing to do. The nearest movie theater was 50 miles away. There was nothing to do except pursue your own interests. So I was very interested in learning about health. I really wanted to learn. I put a lot of time into this line of pursuit. And I'm thinking, wow, like, if fruits and vegetables are the best thing for us, what would happen if the only thing I ate was fruits and vegetables, to the exclusion of everything else? And I knew I was onto something. Two ways. One, the results, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But two, everybody got very, very upset with me and said, that won't work. You can't do that. You can't eliminate everything else, Doug. You can't eliminate. I can't eliminate the things that aren't as good for me as the good things. I can't just eat the good things. How does this make sense in the world? If an apple a day keeps the doctor away, what happens if I just eat apples? I mean, like, something really good should happen. And I looked around and I found out that every animal eats one food at a time when they're hungry till they're full. It's like, wow, one food at a time when they're hungry till they're full. Or they run out of food, or they get chased off the food, or whatever. But as long as they've got available food, they'll just sit down and sit down to a pile of bananas, a pile of oranges, doesn't matter what it is. Sit under the mango tree. We'll eat mangoes all day till till there's just no more to give on that tree. Then we move on. So they all eat one. I didn't like this because I could feel my, human beings are suckers for stimulation. We love stimulation. You look at the way movies are promoted, right? It's a 2-hour nonstop adrenaline rush. Heck, an Outback onion is just sold for its stimulating qualities. They show you a picture of an Outback onion cut so beautifully and deep fried, and it's all about the stimulation. We know it's true. Food that snaps, crackles, and pops, it comes in colors, and who cares what color it is? Your mouth doesn't care what color it is. So, wow, there's just like so much information coming in, and I had to start backing up my intuition with some science. I started looking, and I was shocked what I found. The first thing I found, I was sitting in school still, and we were taking a course to get us ready to sit the national board. Remember sitting the national boards, Doc?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, great fun, right? So you take a prep course. You're sitting in the national board prep course, and I'm sitting there, and my physiology teacher, Mrs. Pettit, and she reads to us something, and she says, she says, when you heat proteins, they denature. They literally, the bonds come apart when you heat protein. The things that are holding the amino acids together, they separate. But it's a different kind of separation than what happens when we do it chemically in our acid of our stomach or with microbes in our gut. So that this denature that happens with heat, it's different than anything else. It's more like Humpty Dumpty, because when it cools off enough so you can eat it, it cross-links those proteins, and you get what are known as enzyme-resistant bonds. Now, I kind of like that phrase. It reminds me of a movie I watched many, many times where somebody, the hero of the movie kind of does something really spectacular, like win at roulette or something. And then he introduces himself to the lady, and he goes, bonds, enzyme resistant bonds. Anyway, I'm going, what the heck are enzyme resistant bonds? And I look it up, and it turns out that it's not that they're so enzyme resistant. We just don't make the enzymes that are necessary to break apart those cross-linked proteins. They will break apart for some other enzymes, but not the ones in the human body. So they become what's called enzyme resistant. They're resistant to our enzymes. Well, when you can't break down the proteins you eat, you've got a problem, because now you've got what's called foreign proteins, and your body recognizes them as foreign proteins. It sends out the all-American cells, the white blood cells. You use them once and throw them away. They're the garbage men of the bloodstream, and yes, they do other things too. But all of a sudden, your white blood cell count's 3 million. You eat a meal and it goes up to 18 million, and that's considered normal. Could you imagine That's 6 times increase. Are there any other blood parameters that go up by 6 times that are still considered normal? Can you imagine if your blood pressure went up by 6 times, or your temperature, or your respiratory rate, or anything? Nothing goes up by 6 times and is still considered normal. The only reason it's considered normal is because everybody does it. Yeah. Not because it's healthy.
It's a statistical norm, and that's an issue we deal with labs and the lab tests. We're dealing with statistical norms, not biological norms.
Exactly.
And we see this a lot with patients come in at white blood counts 3.0, et cetera. And it's, well, the doctor's imaging hematologist will work up, my white count's too low. So, well, no, your white count's actually normal. It's the person with a white count of 8,000 that's probably abnormal, and 9,000, even though it's in the statistical norm, it's probably not biological norm. You can make that argument for, fasting.
A lot of different things in blood work.
Exactly. No, that's exactly
a lot of things, like bone density.
Talk about that.
Because bone density is, no child ever develops the bone density that they should have developed in the first place. So what we call our normal values are actually much, much weaker than they ever should have been in the first place. People eating dairy and meat and on medications are losing bone density that they never had in the first place. They're being compared to people who are osteoporotic in the first place, or at least osteopenic. And so we call it normal, but it's actually weakened bones to start out with. That's a separate story. We'll go back there if there's time. So I'm looking and I go, okay, I need to be able to support this somehow. And there's 2 things I need to be able to support. One thing I need to be able to support is a concept of eating more carbohydrates and less fat than the average person does. The other thing I need to be able to support is the idea of eating raw food instead of cooked food. So I started doing homework for 10 years. And after 10 years, and 10 years living on the road, doing 350 lectures a year, and having a blast doing it, just traveling around the United States and Canada and Mexico and occasionally over to Europe, and just doing lectures on raw foods and lectures on low-fat diet. And pieces of the puzzle started coming together. And this is what I found out. I found out that there was a doctor in 105 years ago whose father was a doctor, and he had some time on his hands. And so he started doing research of his own on his family farm. And the research was a study on cats. And what he found out was that if he fed the cats just what they normally would eat, they did just fine. But if he fed them a diet of all cooked food, they also did just fine for the first generation. But in the next generation, they didn't do as well. And by the 3rd generation, they were very sick cats. The 4th generation of cats failed to reproduce. This is a big deal. 4 generations of cooked food and failure to reproduce. This is the end of a species. And we're seeing it happen to human beings. When 50 years ago, infertility in college-age males was less than 5%. It's well over 25% today and rising. Same with females. This is a big problem. And what I started looking at was what's going on? How does this happen? And it turns out that there's a name for it. And I learned about it in Life magazine in the 1960s. I'm looking at Life magazine, comes in once a week. I'm always looking at it. Like I said, an avid reader. And Life magazine comes in, and there's a story of what's going on in Germany where these German pregnant women were suffering with morning sickness, and the doctors found a drug that would stop their morning sickness and gave them the drug. And everything was fine until the babies were born with no arms and no legs. And instead of feet and hands, they had flippers. They were called the flipper children. And thousands of them were born. Not as many in the States as in Germany, but thousands of them were born just from taking this thalidomide drug, which got called off the market for 40 years. And now it's back on the market. It's being used again now as an anti-cancer drug. Anyway, what that experience did was called teratogenic. And a teratogenic substance or a teratogenic influence is one that doesn't apparently affect your health adversely, but it affects that of your offspring or theirs even as many as 7 generations down the line. And teratogens are found in all cooked foods. I had to do some homework to be able to say that. Teratogens are found in all cooked foods. I said, oh, gee, I wonder what other gen kind of things are found in, gen meaning the origin, right, the beginning. What other kind of gens are found in cooked food? And what I found out is there's these things called tumorigens. Cooked food supplies us with tumorigens, the very essence, the beginning of where our tumors come from. And then tremorigens. And we know that cooked foods contain tremorigens. And many of the tremors that human beings experience, it's not a good thing to be having uncontrollable tremors. I don't want to show it because I'm not making fun of anybody, but tremors are never good. You want to have a steady hand. And the tremorigens are found in cooked food. Were there any others, I wondered? Well, yeah, there's these ones called carcinogens. And carcinogens, once again, are found in cooked food. I say it the way I'm saying it because neither teratogens, mutagens, tumorigens, tremorigens, none of these things are found in raw foods, only in cooked foods. Are there other sources of these things? Sure. You can get it out of the tailpipe of your car. Oddly enough, the Environmental Protection Agency controls what comes out of the tailpipe of your car, but they don't control what comes off of your grill. You can grill up all you want and put out all the carcinogens you want off of your grill, and nobody's going to do a thing about it until your next door neighbor's baby gets cancer and the lawyer's smart enough to sue you for it, and then there's going to be a law. And the law came about first in California, when in 2001 we discovered that when you bake potatoes and when you bake bread, you put into the air various fumes that cause cancer. And today in California, you can't walk into a restaurant without first walking past a sign that you may or may not read that says that there's baking being done on the premises, and therefore there are carcinogens in the air, and you're coming in at your own risk. Well, isn't that just interesting? That law moved from state to state to state, and then a law came about saying that certain fats, when they're heated, are really bad for you. They're called trans fats. And trans fats became outlawed in restaurants and fast food chains. They could no longer use oils that would result in trans fats. And I started thinking to myself, gee, I wonder if there's a law that says it's illegal to cook complex carbohydrates without putting up a sign telling people that we're putting carcinogens in the air. And then there's another law that says it's illegal to cook with trans fats and serve that food to people. I wonder how long it's going to take before there's a third law that starts out, it's illegal to cook, da 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 da, and a fourth and a fifth. Because sure as heck, if there's a law, man, there's going to be another one. So, of course, the way my brain works, and maybe I'm just looking at things slanted, but I started wondering, gee, I wonder how long it's going to take before there's a law that says it's illegal to cook. End of law. And there'll be guys in raincoats standing out on the street corner, and they'll open up their raincoat, go, psst, want to buy some cooked food? They'll close their raincoat again. I don't know. I get crazy pictures in my head, and I got all these gens, and I finally came up with one more gen that made sense to me. And this one's called a mutagen. Now, the mutagen is an interesting gen because what happens in our bodies, you've all heard like every 7 years you got a new body. Well, that's not really true. It's really not true. There's lots of cells that live forever in your whole, I mean, you're never replacing them. But you replace enough cells, like the inside of your mouth, you replace every day. You replace enough cells, red blood cells, 100 days. So that every 7 years, it makes enough cells that it could make a whole new body. It just wouldn't be a body. It would mostly be red blood cells and inside of your mouth. But nonetheless, you make a whole lot of cells. And in order for a cell to reproduce itself perfectly, it requires a certain, like a cookie cutter. We call it a template. And when that template starts to wear out, the cell no longer reproduces itself perfectly. And we have a name for that. It's called a mutation. But nobody talks about that really in mainstream. That's not what we call it. What we actually call it is aging. So, as we said at the beginning of the show, you can't slow down the aging process, but you sure as heck can speed it up. How do you speed it up? You speed it up through the consumption or exposure of mutagens. And mutagens are found in all cooked foods. Yes, with all of the things I've just mentioned, mutagens, teratogens, tumorigens, carcinogens, tremorogens, with all of that stuff, we recognize full well that the hotter the heat and the longer the exposure, the worse the food gets in terms of our health benefits or negative health. And that 5 seconds of steam shouldn't really, can't we just steam it gently, Doc? And I'm going, okay, fine. Expose your face to 5 seconds of steam. You want to find out what proteolytic destruction is all about. You can destroy all the proteins in your face. You'll be scarred for life. 5 seconds. You get a half a second of steam exposure and the proteins have been damaged for life. So I looked at all that and I'm going, okay. I learned about anti-nutrients and found out that they're in cooked food too. We all know I remember I was 4 years old when my grandma explained to me that when she cooks all the vegetables, that a lot of the nutrients get lost, but she said it gets lost into the water. So then we drink the water, we make some kind of soup out of it. She didn't really understand that a lot of them actually are heat sensitive and they get lost. They get damaged, deranged, destroyed, no longer viable. So at that end, the science is saying when we heat foods, we got problems. And along comes this guy, Dr. Pottinger, and he says, if we raise animals on cooked food, this is 1919, his book called Pottinger's Cats came out. It's not news. I don't think it qualifies as news anymore once it's past 100 years old. It can't possibly be news that cooked food is bad for us. Anyway, he predicted the infertility that we're seeing today. 10 years go by, And a French chemist starts doing experiments on cooking food. And what he found out, how about this for brilliant? What he found out is that when you heat up foods, they go brown. Well, he found out a little bit more than that. He did find out a little bit more than that. And because he's a chemist, he started studying what was going on. And Dr. Maillard found that a whole bunch of very interesting things happened when you heat foods. Among them that they go brown, but he wanted to know why do they go brown and what's the oxidation and what's the reduction and what's the chemistry of all that going brown mean and how come it makes interesting fragrances when it gets heated. And he's studying all that chemistry on the volatile oils and all the things that are going on. And it turns out that his work became super important because in the world of perfume today, over 75% of all the flavors and fragrances known rely on the reaction called the Maillard reaction, named after Dr. Maillard. Now, the way medicine goes, they take people's names out of it. They don't want to give anybody credit anymore. And so they've taken the name Maillard right out of history. And they now call it a Browning reaction, which I don't really understand because there is a guy named Browning. They named the gun after him. But nonetheless, it's called a Browning reaction. And what it's basically telling you is like, when you heat up bread, it turns into toast and it goes dark. And that Browning reaction, we now know, the longer the exposure to the Browning reaction or the Maillard reaction, the more carcinogenic the product becomes. So when you burn the toast and eat it anyway, because it's blackened, but we don't want to waste anything. So some people like the blackened rice and on through the various products that when we burn our complex carbohydrates, we now know the chemistry behind that dextrinization process. And we don't have to know it all, but we know that bad things happen because of Dr. Maillard in 1929. Now, this isn't news. 30 years later, in 1959, the Journal of the American Medical Association came out with an article that explained an interesting phenomenon. In this particular phenomenon, what they found out was that the more fat in our diet, the less effective insulin becomes. The higher the level of fat in our diet, not how fat we are, but how much fat we eat compared to our total calories for the day. The more fat in our diet, the less effective insulin became, to a point where insulin became non-functional. This was fascinating. And again, I'm not sure if something that came out in 1959 still counts as news or newsworthy. But you ask most doctors about this and they don't know, even though for the last 10 years, there's been a lovely YouTube video made by a medical doctor called How to Become a Diabetic in 6 Hours. If you haven't watched How to Become a Diabetic in 6 Hours, it's well worth the 5 minutes or whatever it is to take to watch that video. And he demonstrates clearly everything that was learned in the article in 1959, stated in the article in 1959, which I quote in my book, that came out in 2006. So we start learning and we go, wow, isn't this just interesting as all heck? There's got to be some more pieces to this puzzle. Cooked food's really harmful. Raw food's considered health food. That's kind of neat. Now, all the animals built like us eat a low-fat diet. All the long-lived people eat a low-fat diet. All the world's top performers in sport eat a low-fat diet, or a huge majority of them. And we started looking at what happens when we eat a low-fat diet. And it turns out that work was done long before I got interested. What we found out was from medical doctors, from research scientists, from the people who study cancer. People who study cancer found out that cancer cells don't like an oxygen-rich environment, and the more fat in our diet, the lower the oxygen levels in the blood. Sports scientists figured out that all the cells of the body are fueled by glucose, and that the more fat in our diet, the harder it is to get the glucose out of the bloodstream into the muscle cells. Ooh. And then the people who study intelligence found out that the more fat in our diet, the harder it was to get blood oxygen into the brain and glucose into the brain, and we start to become addled. And if you don't have much room to become addled, you get very quickly addled. A great reason to keep on learning, folks. Just keep on learning. Well, over and over and over, doctors, responsible doctors. I used to write for a group called the Doctors for Responsible Medicine, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, the PCRM people. They asked me to do an article on fasting, which I wrote back in 1990. And more people were saying, eat a diet that's lower in fat, reduce the fat in your diet. Oddly enough, to this day, diabetes is still considered a sugar problem, where Journal of Medical Association already told us in 1959 that it wasn't a sugar problem. Sugar was certainly the thing we notice, but the problem was caused by too much fat in the diet. So isn't it just interesting, called sugar diabetes, right? I mean, it's not a sugar metabolic issue. So over and over and over, I start seeing unrelated bits and pieces of information. Sports physiologists tell us, oh, you know what? You could carb load. You could get more carbs into your system. You'll perform better. A guy named T.C. Fry came up with what he called the golden rule of eating, which was, thou shalt not poison thyself. Seemed like a very good rule, and I quoted him thousands of times. Turns out, as science has progressed, we've now learned that there's poisons in everything. Heck, there's poisons in apples and oranges and pears and mangoes. But compared to other food, they have very little poison. And so now the golden rule of eating, if I want to be really honest, is thou shalt poison thyself as minimally as possible. Just as minimally as possible. Now, I understand when you're 23 years old or you're 28 years old and you want to go out and have a good time and you want to go be a little self-destructive tonight, and you're going to drink till you can't even remember what a good time you had. But trust me, at 45 or 55, you start saying, you know what? I need to raise my awareness. I'm seeking enlightenment. I want to find inner peace. I want to remember when I have a good time. I want to remember more of what I want to learn better than I'm learning. I'd like to keep my mind functional. Oh, and my body's starting to fall apart. I went raw as an experiment. I promise. It was just an experiment. I couldn't not after all I'd learned. By the time I learned that fats are bad for you when you heat them, proteins are bad for you when you heat them, carbohydrates are bad for you when you heat them, I'm trying to be self-constructive as humanly possible. And I'm going, why would I want to do all these self-destructive things while I'm trying to be self-constructive? I'm not going to say good and bad. I mean, it's not a value judgment. I'm not judging anything or anybody, but I'm trying to be self-constructive. I don't know about you, but I want to be better 10 years from now than I am now. I'm excited about life. There's lots to do. I want to watch my family grow up. I enjoy being productive. I love that I can still play with kids and have a good time, that if I fall on the floor, or sit down on the floor, I can get up under my own power, and I don't even need to use my hands to do it. I can still stand up. And I'm going to national championships this year, and I'll be on the podium, but I'm really going to win national championships in powerlifting. And there's no reason I shouldn't be able to do that. So I love that all the benefits that ever happened, the number one benefit was mental. Why did I go raw? Well, I went raw because it just seemed obvious. Every animal on the planet eats raw food, except for the ones that, like live in our house with us or something. But all the animals out in nature, they all eat a raw food diet. If we're thinking nature provides us with some models to follow, that's got to be one we need to pay attention to. Every creature eats a raw food diet. Like there's no model anywhere for a cooked food world. It doesn't exist. To think we could do that and get away with it makes no sense, especially with all the science pointing in the other direction. So, okay.
And the interesting thing about the animals that eat cooked foods are the domesticated animals we have in our house, and they're eating the cooked foods that we feed them, and they have the same diseases that we have.
Of course. It's pretty amazing that, but you know what? The biggest thing going in pet food these days is the raw food diet. They call it BARF, biologically appropriate raw food.
Yep. Okay. Very, very important.
And it's huge, raw food for our pets. But boy, raw food for humans? Well, you know what I found out? What I found out was, A, the mental thing was so powerful. B, the physical thing, like my body just doesn't let me down. I haven't been sick. I went raw in 78 and I haven't been sick since. Like, that's a long streak. Every once in a while I might see a doctor. Every once in a while for some reason or another, like at a party or something. And they, they'll ask me, who's your doctor? And I go, I don't have a doctor. I'm my doctor. I don't have any. What's your medical history? I don't have a medical history. I'm not on anything. I don't have a medical history. Like I'm not getting tested all the time. I don't need to get tested because everything still works. Why would I need to get tested? If something goes wrong, I'm going to know about it. Because I won't be able to do pull-ups, or I won't be able to run, or I won't be able to think clearly, or I'll be more tired than I am, or I'll be less enthusiastic, or I'll get forgetful, or something. There's got to be a symptom associated with getting sick, and it's just not happening. So I feel great, and I'm expecting better. And for 107, I look really good. For 18, it's not so good, but for 107, so the mental thing was just so huge for me, because I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I would lose track of what I was talking about. Me and a friend would be having a conversation, and the next thing we know, we're having a really good time, and then we'd look at each other and go, what were we talking about? And neither of us could remember. And my dad, I don't know how this got started. I don't know if his dad did it with him, but I received what was called an allowance. I got 5 pennies for every year I was old. So when I was 10, I got 50 cents. But I had to do something besides be a good kid and do all the chores. I had to also learn 5 new words every week. And he'd give me the words. Here's your words for next week. I had to be able to use them in a sentence. And it was fascinating because both my sister and I had to learn words, and we quickly told my dad, this is too hard. This is too hard, Dad. I can't do it. And so he defined the parameters a little closer, and he started giving us only 5-letter words. I might have the best 5-letter word vocabulary of anybody in the world. I know a lot of 5-letter words. So it just became normal for me to learn a lot of words. And being a reader, learn a lot of words, and then go into med school and learn a lot of words. But the experience I had all the time was I knew the word, but I couldn't get it out of the tip of I couldn't get it out. I knew there was a word. Be in the middle of a conversation, want to use a specific word, and then say to the person, and I could define it, and eventually they'd tell me the word. And I go, yes, that's it. Whatever it was. And the weirdest thing, you know, when I was a kid, I was always hungry. I was always an athlete. I just thought being hungry was normal. Every photo of me, my sister has a whole album of me standing in front of the fridge with the fridge door open, trying to decide what to eat next. Or standing in front of the pantry with the pantry door open, trying to decide what to eat next. And eventually my mom didn't like that. And so she had my dad put a music box on both doors. If I'm standing there with the door open, the music would play, they'd know. Anyway, one of the first things I noticed, I started eating raw food. I'm not hungry. Like in between meals, I'm just satisfied. I used to eat just one meal a day. It would start when I woke up and it would end when I go to bed. And I'd stop eating every once in a while. I'd start snacking, you know, I'm just snacking. And I'd stop snacking 3 times a day intentionally to sit down and eat a meal. But other than that, I'd just get right up from the table after dinner ends and start snacking again. It was pretty wild. Now, before the meal, I would occasionally go down to our basement where my mom had a freezer with all kinds of stuff in the freezer. And I would find the frozen Milky Way bars. And I'd start eating frozen Milky Way bars before dinner. And mom would yell down, don't eat sweets before the meal. Pretty much everybody's mom said that, right? Don't eat sweets before the meal. What's the second half of that sentence? It'll spoil your appetite. And I'm thinking, here I am, I'm this voracious kid who can't stop eating. Nothing satisfies me. And my mom won't let me eat the one thing that will satisfy me. And I says, Mom, isn't that the whole point of eating, is to satisfy your appetite? And she said, well, yeah, but I don't want you to spoil your appetite for what I made. I want you to eat what I made, not eat those candy bars, which I understood. But eventually the penny dropped, as the expression goes. And I go, you know what? The whole point of eating is to satisfy yourself, is to satiate yourself. To be able to walk away from a meal satisfied is a big deal. How do we do that? Well, when I was a kid, my health teacher said, eat fruits and vegetables. In high school, coaches told me eat fruits and vegetables. In college, they told us fruits and vegetables are health foods. In med school, I'm learning about all the nutrients in fruits and vegetables. I mean, I keep hearing about it. You know, I got to try this out. I got to find out. So I started eating more fruits and vegetables. I'm suddenly satiated. I got so fascinated that I decided to ask all the raw food leaders in the world about raw food. And I went to all of them, all 4 of them. I can name them, but it's not necessary. But there was 4 back then. And I went and I asked each one of them one question. I said, as an athlete, if you were going to design a diet for an athlete, would it be cooked food or raw food? And they go, raw food, definitely raw food. I go, what would that diet look like? And all 4 of them said the same thing. They go, we have no idea. No idea whatsoever. All we do is help sick people get well using raw foods, but we never thought to apply it to athletes. And you know what word jumped into my mind? At this point, I'm running a health retreat. I'm seeing the sickest of the sick. I'm seeing incurables. I'm seeing hopeless people who've already been told, like, get your paperwork together because the end is near. And I'm helping these people get well, and I'm giving them fruits and vegetables, and they're getting well. It's just astonishing stuff going on. It didn't touch my heart like athletes touch my heart. Athletes give me, I don't know why. For me, I've always sung to athletes. It just makes me really feel good about, seeing when athletes give their all. So, okay, let's see if we can put these pieces together a little bit. What happened was, once again, a word came into my mind. Now, in every profession, there are certain words that are professional terms. Like in the world of nutrition, the word essential means not that it's important, but it means it's important and you can only get it from your diet. So when people say to me, well, if carbohydrates are so essential, Doc, how come there's no essential carbohydrates? I go, because they're so essential that you don't need to get it from your diet. No matter what you eat, your body can turn it into carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are literally essential, not just in the world of nutrition essential. So there's words in different professions that carry a different meaning. Like a virus in a computer is a little different than a virus in a human, and on through these kinds of words. And a word popped up. Now, being an athlete, the word that I use when people get tired in between tennis points is called on-court recovery. And at the end of the day, after the match is over, they have to recover from the day in order to come out and play again tomorrow. And then, at the end of a grueling season, they have to recover so that they can be fresh again for the next year. And on. This word recovery in sport gets used a lot. And in medicine, we also hear the word recovery. When you're in the intensive care unit, if you recover enough, you get to go to the hospital. From the hospital, if you recover enough, you can go home, and then you can work on your health. But first, get out of the hospital. First, get out of intensive care. And this word recovery gets bandied about, and it never dawned on me until I'm running my clinic back in the 80s that the exact same substances, forces, influences, and conditions that we apply for people in the intensive care unit to help them recover is exactly what we should be giving to world-class athletes to enhance their recovery, to optimize their recovery. And as far as I know, I'm the first person who said, gee, I wonder what would happen if I started giving all these advantages that people in the intensive care unit get, if we started giving those advantages to professional athletes. Let's monitor their blood sugar. Let's monitor their heart rate. Let's keep track of their oxygen saturation. How come only sick people get to find out what their oxygen saturation levels are? Wouldn't a basketball coach be smart to know the oxygen saturation of the players out on the field? Like, when your oxygen saturation goes down, you start making some bad decisions. So I started playing around with this and say, you know what? Let's give the athletes the same advantages that the sick people get. How come the sick people get all the advantages, And lo and behold, athletes started setting records. They started setting world records. They started setting first and only, all kinds of top performances, which is, as you talked about, from Martina right on through to Michael Porter Jr., we're seeing fantastic things happen when the athlete starts learning how to recover better. Because when they can recover better, they already know how to train beyond their abilities to recover. It was time to learn how to recover. So I became, instead of a personal trainer, I became a personal recovery expert. And I teach people how to recover from what? From whatever they've been doing. Because we've been hard on ourselves. And we teach people how to recover. And part of recovery is eating raw food, because thou shalt not poison thyself, as minimally as possible. Probably you learned there's no cholesterol in fruits and vegetables. It's not true. There is cholesterol in fruits and vegetables, but it's 1/1,000,000th as much as in animals.
Mm-hmm.
So in the course of an average lifetime, you eat 1,000 meals a year. If you live to be 1,000 years old, you'd eat 1,000,000 meals, thousands. And so if you live to be 1,000 years old and you eat 1,000 meals a year, one meal of animal product would give you the same amount of cholesterol as if you ate 1,000 meals of plants. I think I could live through one meal of animal products, but a lifetime of them brings us down for a variety of reasons. So to me, I had enough information that I felt I had to look myself in the eye in the mirror. And I just couldn't look myself in the eye and go, I know one thing, but I'm doing something else. That kind of an incongruent, I didn't want to live with being that incongruent to myself. I didn't want to have that kind of contradictions in my life. And a weird thing happened. I can't say I've been accident prone, but I certainly had more than my share of accidents in life. I overestimated what I was capable of a lot of times. And all that accident proneness went away when I started eating raw food. All the learning capacities improved when I started eating raw food. My memory came back. My vocabulary came back. My ability to recall words came back. My energy went through the roof. All of a sudden, I'm needing 2 less hours of sleep every night than I used to need on cooked food. Over and over and over, good things happened. I started being totally satiated in between meals. This had never happened to me. I found controlling my weight became the easiest thing in the world. It was almost effortless. But I still had to deal with that one thing that we talked about earlier. All that food that I used to love, all that food that I know tasted delicious. Fortunately, math saved the day, because in math, if you have the same number on both sides of an equation, that number, that cancels each other out. So the fact that cooked food tastes good is more than canceled out by the fact that raw food tastes good. So taste stops being a factor. Yes, I like the taste of cheeseburger, but I like the taste of mango. Taste isn't a factor. What became a factor is, does my food love me as much as I love it? I mean, how long would you stay with a person who hurt you every night? That relationship is doomed. But how long are you going to stay with food that hurts you every night? I couldn't do it and try to be an athlete and try to be as self-constructive as possible and look myself in the mirror and look my patients in the eye. I just go, I got to eat fruits and vegetables. I got to find a way to make this work. Fortunately, the pattern was already out there. The pattern was eat enough carbohydrates so you're happy, keep your fat relatively low. Everybody in the world eats about 10% of their calories from protein, except the people eating protein out of a can. So pretty much everybody eats about 10% protein. There's a few people whose diet is so meat-centric that they go into the teens, but Pretty much most people eat right around 10. 9 to 11 is considered the worldwide average. So I go, I'm not even going to mess with protein. We're not even going to look at that, because if I eat a diet of just fruits and vegetables, I'm still getting 8-9% of my calories from protein. So that's not an issue. It's just swinging the seesaw a little bit to favor carbohydrates a lot more, favor fats a lot less. And the only way I'm going to do it with raw food is to eat more fruit. So to answer your question from the beginning, how do we succeed? We eat more fruit. We eat so much fruit that you can make a meal of it for breakfast. We eat so much fruit that you can make a meal of it for lunch. Most people don't care about that meal all that much anyway. So we can kind of get through breakfast and lunch and just eat fruit all you want, unlimited quantities. Enough fruit at breakfast to hold you till lunch, enough fruit at lunch to hold you till dinner. That's a learning process. It's a lot more fruit than you think it is. Lovely part about it. It's more volume. You get to eat more.
So the fruit is the key to the satisfaction, maintaining a raw diet.
Yeah, your mama told you so when you were little. Don't eat sweets before the meal. They'll satiate you.
That's a good point. So you took away from that. This is a great presentation. It's amazing. And I was going through a lot of questions.
I saw.
Writing a lot of questions here. So here's the thing. I'm going to start with the last one and go back to some earlier questions I wrote. The concept of eating fruit. Now, we have the whole issue of seasons. And we live in different parts of the world. Here in Texas, fruits, watermelon season is almost gone. We probably have another month. We get it from Chicago, etc. The melons are gone. Those are my favorites, the melons. Of course, moving into winter, of course, you get the citrus fruits more in winter. And of course, there's some other things. So how do you deal with the seasonal aspects? I guess are you conscious of the seasonal aspect? Are your fruits all local, regional?
No, we're not choosing to live in the tropics. We're tropical beings. Again, if we were gonna use nature as our model, we're tropical beings. And we wouldn't be wearing clothing, by the way. We'd be walking around like all the other creatures who are naked. They just don't look naked to us. But we'd be naked in the tropics if we were.
That's a great point. So you're saying because we're tropical beings, we should import our environmental food to us? Well,
the thing is, we're choosing to live all around the world.
Okay.
And that's okay. But we're still tropical beings. So we use heat, we use clothing, we use bedding, we use ways we live in a little mini tropical environment that we carry around with us always. You leave the tropics, you're cold.
Yep.
Quickly. What is our natural food? Our natural food would come from the tropics for sure. That's not even a question, but we could eat temperate foods. That's okay too. What I got to do over time was to learn more about fruit, to realize how many different foods are available, how many different months of the year. And as you say, like mangoes are available for 3 to 4 months. And then citrus is available for 3 to 4 months. And pomegranate's available for 3 to 4 months. And the seasons overlap to a point where I can give you 3 or 4 fruits for every month of the year, which was something that I think most people would learn as 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds if they were eating a raw food diet. But because they weren't, because we're ignorant about this. Now, I happen to live in England, which imports food from more countries than any country in the world since 2012. Before that, it was Holland, and England was second. But 2012, with the Olympics, we increased so all the Olympic athletes could get food from their home country. Nonetheless, I start to see how many fruits are out there. And there's roughly 300 to 400 different fruits that are readily available during the course of each year, especially if you say, well, how many varieties of grape can you name? You can probably name 10 varieties of apple and 10 varieties of grape. And and all of a sudden you have a lot of different fruits available. And grapes come in their season, and fig season for us just ended, but in Turkey, fig season is just finally hitting the full stride. And the Anonas, the Cherimoyas, they're coming out of Spain now. There's a lot coming out. And as you learn about the different fruit, I mean, berries are in the spring, you start learning, autumn is all the core fruit.
So I'm going to jump into a tiny rabbit hole and come out before it gets too bad, but related to fruits being imported, here in the States, it's probably worse here in the States than it is anywhere else in the world. There are a lot of places in the world that don't export food from the United States because of the crazy stuff we do to them. So you talk about fruits, and we go walk into the average supermarket in the United States, and you're worried about GMO, you're worried about the foods being gassed, you're worried about them having, chemical peel on it to preserve freshness and make it look pretty, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
I take that's not an issue with you and your environment in England, even though you're eating food that's imported, or is it?
You know about the dirty dozen and the clean 15?
Yeah, I've heard about that. I mean, and yeah.
A lot of it's refutable.
Yep.
But over time, you start learning more and more and more. Where is it important to pay attention? So, do I really care if the peel of my orange has something on it? Well, probably not all that much because it's not getting through to the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Do I care if the avocado has something on the outside? Well, no, I'm not going to eat the avocado skin. Do I care overall? Yes, I care overall. I mean, the amount of chemicals we're exposing ourselves to, I care. But in terms of how is it going to affect me personally and my nutrition, not that much. And the reason I say so is because all the other food that we have access to is also equally treated as badly, or worse.
Yeah.
Or worse.
Yeah.
I mean, you figure all the animals are given more drugs than you could ever imagine, plus their own drugs that they manufacture. I mean, when you're getting the epinephrine from a cow, this is the stimulating factor. So, and the drugs that they get and the chemicals in their food, by the time you eat a piece of meat, you're eating about 40 times the chemicals you could possibly be getting if you eat an orange that got sprayed.
So worst case scenario, now people would argue in the orange and the thick skin things that the ground is sprayed and it's going through the roots and to the inside. But I understand your point.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the more global point is that worst case scenario, it's still the lesser of two evils. Is that a
By
fair?
far and away in 100 different ways. Planting fruit trees makes more sense than a field of grain ever possibly could. I'm going to tell you, imagine being in a field of mango as big as Kansas. You might never leave. But if you were in a field of wheat the size of Kansas, you would starve before you could get out. You couldn't walk out, and you can't eat wheat. Makes you sick.
Yeah.
So by far and away, if you're going to say yes, there's always a little bit of evil, but not really, because trees produce so many good things. Trees bring nutrients up from the subsoil. I mean, yes, there's some spray on the ground, and I understand that, but trees, they're not getting their nutrients off of the soil, the topsoil. They're deep down. They're getting nutrients out of rocks and subsoil that's well down below.
So your argument is there. So the
fruit's a cleaner fuel all the way around.
So there's a neutralization process of the fruit tree or the fruit plant, however you want to describe it, that is, in your opinion, adequate to counter all the evil things we're doing to the environment. Is that a fair assessment? Or at least neutralize it to a certain extent?
I think planting more fruit trees has got to be the right answer, yes.
Gotcha. So no, that's great. I wanted to, I like that answer. Let me just run down a few other things. I know our audience has some questions as well.
Sure.
Your thoughts on time restricted eating? Are you big
Okay,
on it?
this may come up several times.
Okay.
Many of the so-called health hacks, the biohacks, many of the so-called health hacks are actually all put into place to solve one problem. And that problem is obesity. And it doesn't apply on a raw food diet. Many of the things that we know are health practices, or we learned are health practices, actually don't even apply on a raw food diet.
So raw food, a special fresh fruit at 10 o'clock at night and it's dark, it's not a problem.
Not for me. If I'm hungry, I'm going to eat.
Fascinating.
If I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. If I'm going to eat so much that in the morning I don't have any appetite, or I got upset, or I ate till I hurt, or I ate till I had nightmares, but that's never going to happen on a couple pieces of fruit. You're going to have nightmares if you eat nuts at midnight, but not fruit. So when we're talking about eat more fruit, I'm really talking about fruit being so much fruit that it makes up at least half the volume of everything you eat in the course of a day. 90% of the calories, half the volume. It's a lot of fruit. It's fruit for breakfast, fruit for lunch, and all the fruit you want before dinner, or you will have cravings.
And your diet does have a lot of greens in it. It's just very fruit heavy. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, half the volume of what I eat is vegetables.
Makes sense. That's certainly. And then the last question, I'll turn it over for other questions in the audience. You hear about other pillars of health: sleep, of course, exercise. I imagine you're big on that. Relationships, spiritual connectedness, all that. How are you on the other pillars? Some people, you hear stories, well, so-and-so went raw and they
You have a copy of 80-10-10 right there?
Oh gosh, it's on my, let's see here. It's somewhere on my bookshelf. If you talk, I'll look for it.
Okay. Well, here it just happens I have one right here. Let me show you.
Okay.
Let me show you page. On this copy, page 9. Here's your pillars. Page 9. This is pretty early on in the book. Everything from sleep to fresh air to sunshine to emotional poise to interaction with nature to restedness to all 32 factors, and none of them is more important than the next. The one that's most important is the one you don't have. It could be any of them, though. It could be any one of them. If we said it was 32 spokes on a wheel, developing one until it's longer than all the others and the wheel don't roll. Develop one that's shorter than all the others and the wheel don't roll. So we really need to balance our health. And all this talk for an hour and a half about nothing but food, it's just because we're probably more further away from reality and from healthy living with food than we are with any of the other factors at the moment. But I'm telling you, sedentary lifestyle is not far behind.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a big one. That's a big one.
There's no way to be well nourished on a sedentary lifestyle. You can't eat enough to be well nourished unless you become obese. So if you're not an active individual, you cannot be well nourished.
Wow. I'm going to turn the floor over to our audience. Questions, Jackie, why don't you take over as moderator? I see a digital hand up.
Thanks,
So the
Doc.
first question,
I do want to say one other thing.
Rose, you'll be number 2.
Okay. And I want to just say one thing before it starts, which is I'm happy to answer questions. Thrilled, in fact. One of the things I love most is thinking on my seat. But but another little example. We're told that the standard American diet is so water deficient that we need to drink 8 to 12 glasses of water a day.
I'm glad you go ahead. Yes.
I'm on a raw food diet that doesn't include salt. I haven't had salt since I was 18 years old. I'm 70 now, so it's been a good while since I've had salt. And my salt levels are fine, my sodium levels are fine, my performance is fine. But I only drink like 8 to 12 glasses of water a year.
Mm.
I don't do it intentionally. If I'm thirsty, I drink. I got nothing against drinking. But I never need to drink. My fruits and my vegetables give me all the water I need.
I'm glad you pointed that out. That's one of the questions I intended to ask. I didn't write it down. So I'm often asked, what's the best water to drink? And I'm going to answer that based on what I've learned from you tonight. The best water you drink is the water you eat from your
for sure
diet.
For sure.
Starting fruit raw diet. Okay, I love it.
All right. So the first question was from Prasanga. Are you saying, Dr. Graham, that a diabetic with an A1C of 8 can reverse their diabetes if they go on an only fruit diet? How do we reconcile the sugar spikes?
Okay, so what I said was that the higher the fat in your diet, the harder it is to get sugar out of your bloodstream. And there are physiologists who have hypothesized that if you had no fat in your bloodstream at all, which is not a situation we can have, so it's hypothesis, but there's physiologists who have hypothesized that if there wasn't any fat in the diet, in the bloodstream at all, that we wouldn't even need insulin for glucose to jump from the bloodstream to the cells. It has to go through two walls. Now, we know that glucose can permeate that way because if you take sugar in your mouth, like eat a pear or an apple or a peach, if you have sugar in your mouth, that it will get into your bloodstream under your tongue because those vessels are so close to the surface. You can see them if you look at the bottom of your own tongue. I'm not going to do it right now, but you could look at the bottom of your tongue in a mirror. You'll see the vessels. And the sugar, the concentration gradient when you have sugar in your mouth is so high that it'll actually jump into your bloodstream right from there. So that's a theory. But we do know for fact that the lower the amount of fat in your diet, the easier it is to get the sugar out of your bloodstream. We've known this, as I say, since 1959 when the Journal Medical Association article came out. So my experience has been this with thousands of diabetics, that if you're a type 2 diabetic and you go on the 80-10-10 diet, you will not be a type 2 diabetic within 60 hours. Diabetes will be over for you. You'll no longer be insulin dependent. If you're type 1 diabetic and a true type 1 diabetic that's producing no insulin whatsoever, you don't have the parts or for some reason the parts don't work, you will remain a type 1 diabetic, but done properly, you will reduce your reliance on insulin 75%. You will increase your what is called your carbohydrate to insulin ratio. This is your insulin sensitivity, 75%. This is a lot. So a person taking 25 units a day can almost manage that compared to a person relying on 100 units a day whose basically blood sugar is just out of control. They're going to go blind. They're going to lose limbs. It's going to get ugly really fast on 100 units a day. So knocking it down to 25 or knocking it down to 15 is just astonishing for a type 1 diabetic. Yes, that's what I'm saying. On a fruit-based diet.
And also, let me ask you this, and this has been our experience with our diabetics. It's not just, because the fat is thought to mediate insulin resistance by means of inflammation. And so in our experience with the diabetics, when we get them on a plant-based diet, it's often not enough to be a plant-based. They have to be raw. I mean, the other
Has to be raw. Oh, it has to be raw.
because the cooked foods is triggering inflammation, which also is another contributing factor to insulin resistance. So,
Agreed.
so just like the people that the doctor said, you can't eat fruit, and they take the dead animal flesh out of their diet because that which is the fat from the animals, it potentiates insulin resistance. So once you remove that contributing factor, insulin resistance, then the blood sugar comes down because you metabolize it better. But the same thing goes for the cooked foods as well. And so if you're cooking foods and having the high fruits juxtaposed with cooked foods, that will give you the spikes. That's been our experience.
Yeah, you're spot on.
Rose, you have a question. Why don't you unmute yourself?
Okay. Hi, Dr. Montgomery and everyone. And Dr. Graham, hi. And you said that we shouldn't pay too much attention about the surface of some of our fruits, but like for instance, oranges has the most vitamin C, I've heard, in the peel, in the actual skin. So I know there's so many corporations that are doing something called the appeal on our organic foods, and they're just corrupting everything. So my question to you is, what's the solution for, fruits and vegetables that have most of the vitamin C in the skin? And the other question is, how do you feel about eating as much organics versus traditional? Because I prefer organics, but I live in a rural area that you can hardly get that because most of the farmers here, they put the bomb material like fertilizers on their food. So I just have two questions for you, and thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Jackie.
Those are great questions. I'm going to start out with the t-shirt I'm wearing says whole, fresh, ripe, or organic plants. Okay, that's my motto. Whole, fresh, ripe, or organic plants. I'm not putting one of those things above the others.
Okay.
So I'm a big fan of organic, and certainly there are some foods, apples, pears, berries, lettuce, celery, cucumber. These foods we always buy organic. We just don't compromise there. There's ones where being organic, like, it really makes a big difference. I'm not sure I agree with you about the peels containing most of the vitamin C, nor does it matter. What we're looking for in nutrition, I've always described as Goldilocks nutrition. We're not looking, what we've been taught is that this has more of this and this has more of that, as if more equated to better, and it doesn't. If more equated to better, then the most would be the best, which would make supplements, a vitamin E tablet or a vitamin A or sugar or protein out of a can and oil out of a bottle, it would make those all the best things. And they're not. They're not at all. We're looking for whole food. And in the world of whole food, nature already gave us a range through the course of the year of fruits and vegetables, hundreds of different fruits during the course of the year. And in doing that, provided us with a nutrient load that most closely mimics human nutritional needs. So when you're looking at shoes, you don't want the biggest pair of shoes you can get. You want a pair of shoes that fit. And you don't want small, you don't want big. When you're looking for vitamin A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you're not looking for the most, you're looking for the amount you need that mimics human nutrient needs. In fact, one of the first groups of explorers in the Arctic got stuck. And although they had plenty of food, they died from vitamin A poisoning because they were eating polar bear, and polar bear meat is so high in vitamin A that it'll kill you before a winter goes through. So they all died before winter, even though they had plenty of food, had food and water and shelter, but they were eating polar bear and died from hypervitaminosis A. What a anyway. So more does not equate to better. In fact, when you eat too much vitamin C, you end up with diarrhea. So more isn't automatically better. Fruits and vegetables will give you
Thank you.
exactly the nutrients you need. But please understand, not all of your nutrition is about food. I mean, you get vitamin D from the sun, right? You're getting B12 from bacteria. You're getting a lot of different, you lose vitamin C from environmental and emotional stress. There's a lot of nutrients that are more about things other than just food. And
Thank you.
we don't want to get that. The weird thing is people eating at McDonald's aren't worrying about their nutrition. And here we are saying, well, my fruit isn't perfect, but should I be worrying about the nutrient? No, you should not be worrying about the nutrients. You should be worried about whether your diet's predominated by fruits and vegetables.
Got you. Thank you so much.
All right, Sonia. You're muted, Sonia. Can you unmute?
Okay.
Little button
Hello,
on the bottom left.
everyone.
Hi.
I want to thank first Dr. Montgomery for making this possible,
Oh,
just
yes,
your entire
absolutely.
program. And Dr. Graham, my question is that I tend to have heartburn when I eat fruits, bananas, most fruits.
Mm-hmm. That's the whole question. Okay. As Dr. Montgomery said, when we start adding this and that along with this and that, we get very unpredictable results, and we don't actually know who's the culprit. Now, as a doctor, I have an oath to act responsibly, and I'm not going to diagnose you or prescribe to you over the internet without taking a history or anything else. So I have to talk a little bit generic. But anytime I've seen that kind of problem pop up, what I do is I create a very short transition program, usually a day or two, to help people transition from what they were doing to what I want them to be doing. And then at that point, they find they can handle whatever fruits I give them without having any of that heartburn problem. It's not usually the fruit per se, but what you're eating before it, after it, with it, alongside of it. We have to understand different foods digest at different speeds. They pass through your digestive tract at different speeds. If you give food that passes through you quickly a head start, then the other stuff is never going to catch up. But if you eat something that's slow to pass through your system and then add on fruit on top of that, man, indigestion is going to be predictable.
Okay.
So I don't know enough about your exact program, but there are ways to custom design a program to help you get through that first day or two. And then after that, it really only takes a day or two.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Sonia. So I'll just take one question from the chat here. Someone asked, do you have a preference or recommendation about starchy fruit versus non-starchy fruit? Same
Sure.
thing about
Sure.
fatty fruit versus non-fatty fruit, and then seeds.
And then seeds. Okay.
And also dried fruit. Someone asked about dried fruit.
Okay. So on my t-shirt, whole, fresh, ripe, raw organic plants. Fresh is just as important as everything else. But I mean, if you're going to starve or eat dried fruit, I'd rather eat dried fruit than starve. So it's a viable alternative, but it's an alternative to fresh. Fresh is better for us. Always fresh is better for us. If we're in a world of good, better, best, my whole world has been about not showing people where the target is. My whole world has been showing them where the bullseye of the target is, and then helping people transition towards that bullseye. Because the only way I'm going to get peak performance out of athletes is if I have them go to the bullseye. The only way I'm going to save lives of people who are hopelessly sick is by guiding them towards the bullseye. I can't just get them heading in the general direction. It just won't do the job. You got to stack every card in their favor. So if we look up in a dictionary the definition of starch, what we find out is that it's tasteless. Among other things, it's tasteless. It's not bland, it's tasteless, which isn't really anything that appeals to me at all. I'm not looking for tasteless food. I want my food to be sweet and juicy. I know for a fact I want sweet and juicy. Mother's milk is sweet and juicy. Fruit is sweet and juicy. Now, can we pervert that and have coffee and cake? That's sweet and juicy too. Everybody wants sweet and juicy. That's why we all have a sweet tooth. I mean, it's not hard to understand the need for sweet and juicy. So I'm going to go that way. I'm never going to eat starch. I wrote a book called Grain Damage back in the 90s, and I'm sticking with it. Complex carbs are too complex to digest. We do not have the enzymes to digest many of the different complex carbs. We absorb simple sugars. We don't even digest them. We just absorb them. No digestion required. It's kind of a cool system. So I'm always going to go for simple sugars. The fructose and glucose are the fuel of every cell in the body. Now, in terms of fatty versus non-fatty fruits, there's nothing wrong with fatty fruits. If you want to eat the occasional avocado, you want to have some olive, you want to have durian or breadfruit, or there's others. Aki's my favorite fatty fruit, but if you want to have some fatty fruit, be my guest, and you'll find it digests easier than seeds. Seeds digest more easily than nuts. But as far as having nuts and seeds and doing all that, I mean, it's not that that's inherently wrong. It's just, we're talking about an ounce or two a day. We're not talking about pounds.
All right, thank you. Samantha, you have a question. Why don't you unmute?
Yeah, mine will be quick. Just going back to what the woman was asking about, fruit causing acid reflux, and you said you take folks on a 2-day transition. I'm curious what that 2-day transition is that like erases how the body is responding to fruit in that negative way.
Good question. It's a great question. And if I had a generic recipe cookbook response, I'd give it to you, but I actually don't. Some people have digestive troubles that are different than other people. We have to make different, as a doctor, what I do is I talk to people individually. And so what is that transition? For some people, that transition starts with vegetables and transitions to fruit. For some people, that transition may include skipping one meal. For some people, it might be, as we heard about earlier, about closing the window of when we eat for a day so that we only eat at a limited time and giving just a little rest. For some people, it could be nothing but bananas for a day. There's a lot of different reasons for using different programs for each individual, and it's not cookie cutter. So I can't really, I wish I could, just say, hey, just do this. And as I mentioned in my book as well, like there's plenty of room for individuality, for sensitivities to preferences, for likes and dislikes, for allergies. You can't just say, oh, automatically everybody does this, because we are all in fact quite different from each other. It's just that our similarities outweigh our differences by billions to one. So we respect the similarities. We can say we're designed to eat fruits and vegetables. We have 2 eyes or whatever it might be. But we're also have to respect the individual differences. I know I've got clients where if I gave them anything with any avocado in it at all, take them to the hospital. They're going into anaphylactic shock. And then other people go, I eat avocado all day. I had a client one time who couldn't eat any celery at all. If there was any celery in anything he ate, take him to the hospital. He's going into anaphylactic shock. So you can't generalize in that sense and just say, oh, it should be this or it should be that. It's kind of like I say, I want the best for every individual client. I don't want average. I don't want medium. I can't just say everybody eats celery. It's not going to work for everybody.
Mm. All right, thank you, Dr. Graham. Nancy, you have a question?
Yes, actually, you just opened me to another question as well. I recently did the medical mediums liver rescue protocol, and when I went to celery juice, immediately, like within the half an hour, I've got diarrhea, watery diarrhea. And does that mean that that was a cleansing reaction, or was that a negative response? That's one
Isn't that
question.
a great question? And I'm going to say that's going to be a matter of perspective, isn't it? And interpretation and
Drink it again.
In the first 100 people that came to me with indigestion, 99 of them had eaten pizza the meal before. And I said to each and every single one of them, do you think it was the pizza? And they go, nah.
It's never the pizza.
And I said, well, let's find out. What do you say we have pizza again tonight? And they go, no, doc, it was the pizza. So nobody knows. Nobody could tell you. But my understanding, a lot of people blame a lot of things on detox. I don't blame detox on anything. Your body is detoxifying itself 24/7, always has since the day you were born. 100 trillion cells, every single one of them is detoxing all the time. In 100 different ways, we're constantly detoxing. And when it's done properly, we have no awareness of it whatsoever. Your body's taking care of business, and you're not supposed to notice these things that people call detox reaction. I don't think that's true at all. Here's my example. When we're eating cooked food, it's like banging your head against the wall. And when you stop banging your head against the wall, you don't get a detox reaction from that. You feel good from that. And I'm going to say with food, if you're doing it right, you should feel better, and you should never feel worse, and you never go through a period of detox. None of that should happen. No symptoms should come about as a result of getting healthier. That's not what happens. Symptoms come about when we're not getting what we need.
Thank you.
That might put me out on some thin ice, but I'm taking a stand.
Yeah. Well, actually, it happened for the 6 days of this program. But anyway, my original question had to do with my blood sugars. So I have a continuous glucose monitor, and I notice that I regularly spike my glucose, and then often it also drops below normal on a lot of raw fruits. So counsel me there on, is that?
Once again, eating a lot of raw fruits tells me very little. Use chronometer or any way you like to track what you eat and tell me how much fat is in your diet. If your diet is more than 10% fat as a function of total calories for the day, you're never going to get your blood sugar working right. Once you get it right, you can eat more fat and you won't have issues. But until you get it right, you got to drop dietary fat down to single-digit dietary fat, and you'll have no issues with your blood sugar. And I've seen it happen thousands of times, so it's not like I think maybe this might work. It's that straightforward. But you got to monitor it first. until you learn to get a sense of how much fat, because most people are shocked. I've had more people come to me and tell me, I'm doing exactly what you said. How come it's not working? And then we actually write down what they eat in a day and look at the numbers and find out that 50% of their calories are coming from fat. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about 10% or less. And sugar metabolic issues are non-existent.
Okay.
All right.
Try it and get back to Dr. Montgomery and tell him that you actually tried it. You ran the numbers. And when you run the numbers, you'll see where the problem is for sure.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Nancy. Lillian, you are next.
Hi, and thanks for coming tonight and giving
My
us this
pleasure.
wonderful talk. I've got two questions. So one question is, do you do any supplements at all?
As a responsible doctor, I don't supplement prophylactically in advance of having a problem. No, that would be irresponsible, I think, to take supplements before you have a problem. If a person has a problem, they come to me and their iron is low or something is low. We're going to try to find out why, but taking supplements can buy us some time while we find out why, and that's probably responsible, especially if it's life-threatening. Mm-hmm. In the same way, let's understand that malnourished is also a condition that exists when we have too much of any given nutrient. So we can't just haphazardly supplement, because we might find that we actually already had too much and we don't want more. Weirdly enough, some of the things that we supplement with, the symptoms of having too much are identical to the symptoms of having too little, like in the case of iodine. So we have to be very careful about this generic supplementation. But I never just I'm not, again, as I said, food isn't the only answer, but I'm not recommending that you have parts removed because they might go wrong later. And I'm not recommending that we supplement in advance of having a problem. That's pretty much the same issue, I think. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. And the other question I had is, what about, you said you don't eat grains, but what about sprouted grains?
Are sprouted grains still grains?
Okay.
If they're still grains, then they're going to digest like grains. And I don't eat grains. I didn't give up grains because I wanted to. Mm-hmm. Please understand, I did not give up grains because I wanted to. I was as addicted as the next man to grains. But they didn't work for me. And when I tried not eating them, I felt so much better that it became, I mean, I wrote the first anti-grain book ever written, right? It's called Grain Damage. It's back in the early 90s, I wrote Grain Damage, and there, since then, now there's 100 books about anti-grain books, but mine was first, for what it's worth. And it wasn't because I wanted to give up grains. I can understand the lure. And I understand that in times of fire, flood, famine, drought, crop failure, like we can store grains and get through. That's why they're called a staff, right? Because they're the staff of life, because they bring you through like a crutch. They'll bring you through times when you can't use your own legs. So when you're not pulling fruit off the trees because it was a bad year, you can still get by, and civilizations survive. But we also understand that crutches cripple. If you use a crutch all the time, crutches cripple. We don't want to be living on crutches. We want to be running free on fruits and vegetables. And me personally, I'm happy to never eat starch. I'm perfectly happy to always have sweet and juicy fruit.
Okay.
When I don't want fruit, I want vegetables.
All right. Thanks, Lillian.
Thank
Allison, why don't you unmute yourself?
Hello, everyone.
Hi,
Uh,
Allison.
glad to be here. One problem, okay, so eating fruit, I have a problem with. I cannot eat a lot of fruit. When I eat an apple, sometimes the juice from the apple will choke me.
Mm,
But I can juice and I can drink juice and have no problem with it because it's
that's where you start.
between eating that, chewing it. So my question is, more juice, if fruit juice, would that be harmful because of the sugar? If I do straight fruit juice and vegetable juice, or maybe fruit juice, if I add more fruit juice to my diet, would it help? Would it hurt me? Is basically what I'm trying to figure out.
So this is a great question, and it's a great question to end on too, because what no matter what I say, and I like I said, I've done thousands and thousands of lectures, and somebody invariably, after I explain that our need for protein is somewhere around 10%, and scientists from every field have proven that our need for fat is somewhere right around 10%. Therefore, because my math's reasonably good, our need for carbohydrate has to be somewhere around 80% of our calories. I'm choosing to get that carbohydrate from fruit because fruit is health food. It's better for us than starch that has to be cooked in order to be consumed. When I was a kid, we used to get we get paper, scissors, and paste, and we'd make art happen. Do you all do that in school? Remember that? Scissors, paper, and paste.
Mhm.
And there was always one kid in the class who would eat the paste. It wasn't me, but there was always somebody who would eat the paste. And the teacher invariably said, "Don't eat the paste." I remember that vividly. I remember Mrs. Kramer in fourth grade telling us, "Don't eat the paste." Well, you make paste with flour and water. That's how you make wallpaper paste. Flour and water. That's all it takes. But you can hide it. You could add sugar, and then you'd have pastry. Oh no, it's still paste, isn't it? It's pastry. Or you could just add eggs, and it could be, oh no, that would be pasta. That's still paste. So it doesn't seem to matter. If you add sugar and eggs, well, then you get in Spain, you get pastel, the cookies, and oh no, it's still past. It's still paste. How do you like that? They didn't even hide the name that we're eating paste. Now we've got school teachers around the world telling kids don't eat paste. And then we got doctors telling people eat paste. We got medical books telling us that paste is tasteless. And we got people saying, I want my food to have more flavor. Who's going to eat by choice tasteless food that has no vitamin C whatsoever as the main staple of your diet? It so doesn't make sense to me. So, back to your issue. Whole food is best. Refined, even if, I went to school, I learned that fiber is good for me. But oddly enough, if you watch TV, breakfast cereals have fiber added, but then we're supposed to remove the fiber to make juices because juices are better for us than whole food. How you really like it's better to add fiber in the morning and remove fiber in the afternoon. Both of them are better than just whole food? No. But if you have a specific condition, that means that your specific individual transition needs to go through a certain route, well, then that's the route we go. And maybe you start out with more juices. But invariably, people hear this whole thing about 80% of calories coming from carbohydrate. And then they go, but isn't that too much sugar? Well, no, it's not. It's exactly the amount we need. It's Goldilocks. Goldilocks says we need 80% of our calories, up to 90% of our calories coming from simple carbohydrates from fruit. It's just that straightforward. So it's not too much sugar. The question really that you're asking is, when I remove the fiber, does it, because fiber moderates sugar uptake, without the fiber, is it going to be a problem? And the answer is really no. It's really not going to be a problem. But eventually, if you start with a bunch of juices, eventually you're going to want to add the fiber as well, because fiber is an important nutrient. And when you don't have enough fiber, you end up constipated. And that's not really a plus in anybody's book. So slowly but surely, we could add fiber back into your diet as well. It's just got to be gradual enough so you don't have any negative consequences.
Wow.
That sound responsible, Doc?
That sounds very responsible. I guess I just want to add a footnote. I suspect you mean cold pressed juices and not the pasteurized stuff, right?
Yeah, never cooked juices. We're talking about homemade juices.
I'm pretty sure that's what you're saying. You know, Doug, thank you very much. This is a very impressive presentation. You spoke from the heart, the brain, the soul. I think every
God
ounce.
bless. Thank you so much.
I learned a lot, and this is amazing. But I like the way you simplified things. And I like also, you know, because I threw out the whole rabbit hole aspect of what about this and what about that. And I like the way you sort of pushed all that back, because, you know, we often worry about GMO and all these things, and the fact that, you know,
They're all important.
important, yes, but you start with the least of the evils, and then you start to improve from there. So as close as you get to the bullseye, then you work your way toward even better. And I like that whole concept first and foremost.
Thank you.
Guys, this has been great. I hope you learned as much as I did. I've got about 4 or 5 pages of notes, the questions answered and the whole like. And this is recorded, so tell all your friends in the community that they can come and watch this. Doug, this is great. Thank you very much, and we will invite you on again. And
I would love to come back. I really love to come back. I'll tell you so many more parts of the story. And I got to say also, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. I look forward to sharing the link. So I'll let all my people know about this interview. And at the same time, I love talking with medical people. You know, I invite medical people. I say, look, if I say anything that's medically unsound, please just stop me right here. Like, expose me to the public, because I went to medical school too. My specialty was chiropractic, but it's still medicine. And I think I'm sitting on pretty firm ground, because I was paying attention going through school. I paid my way through school, and
the unfortunate thing in my medical experience that most of what they taught us in medical school is medically unsound, but we'll get into that.
yeah, that's an issue too, isn't it? But there's bits and pieces.
Yep. There's bits and pieces. Well, this has been great, guys. Thank you very much for hanging out with us tonight. And until
It's
next
a real
time,
treat for me. Thanks, Doc.
great treat. So
Thank
y'all
you,
have a great
Graham.
night. And don't feel guilty about eating a front piece of fruit tonight. You've heard it from the
For sure.
Everybody have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. If you got value out of this video, please like it, subscribe, and hit the notification button to see our next show.